Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. We're going to let people arrive and then we're going to get started. We really appreciate you joining us today. Let's just wait another minute or two to make sure everyone is here. I always feel that it's only right to start on time for the people that are here on time. So we might as well get this thing going. Thank you everyone again for being here. Thank you for joining us for this webinar exploring the Stanford History Education's group curriculum, Civic Online Reasoning. I'm so happy to have Joel Breakstone, the director of SHEG here. He has a lot of great information to share with you all today. Today is our first day of the 6th annual Media Literacy Week, and the purpose of Media Literacy Week is to highlight the work of media literacy educators and organizations and increase the public's awareness in media literacy education, the role of media literacy, the role that media literacy can play in our democracy and in protecting our democracy is becoming clearer every day. We feel that we have a moral imperative to improve our educational system to provide students with the skills they need to succeed in the digital world. There's my dog. Media Literacy Week gives us a chance to shine the light on its importance. This year, namely, besides planning Media Literacy Week, also launched the National Media Literacy Alliance. And the Alliance is a network of leading education organizations. And we're all united in the effort to advance media literacy education. And we're so excited to be partnering on this event with one of our alliance partners, the Journalism Education Association. And Kelly Glasscock, the executive director of JEA, is here. And I want to introduce him to say a few words.
Sorry about that. Hi there, Michelle, and everyone else joining today. Thank you. I am here representing JEA. We serve scholastic journalism educators across the country and even around the globe. We were often referred to our members as the boots on the ground, as they're in the classrooms working to educate our nation's youth about media literacy, media consumption, creation, everything in between. But media literacy is, well, it's well established in many of our classrooms. We certainly understand and see the value of expanding that well beyond media programs in secondary schools. But I'm honored to be here today on today's stream. I love the work that's being done by SHEG, and our members benefit from that work. By joining today, you will too. So thanks for having me, and thanks for being here.
Thanks so much, Kelly. So without further ado, let's get into the bulk of our program, which is Joel. So Joel, we're going to disappear and let you do your thing, and then we'll come back in a little bit to have a conversation and ask some questions.
Thanks so much. Can everybody see my screen all right? Alrighty, so thank you so much for that warm welcome, Michelle, and thanks everyone for joining us today. I am the director of the Stanford History Education Group, and for the last 5 years, my team and I have been conducting research about how young people evaluate online information and also how we can help them to be better consumers of that content. This issue, as we all know, is more critical now than ever. There is an enormous amount of dangerous disinformation streaming across our screens, content that presents a very real threat to the health of our democracy, and in the case of COVID misinformation, our literal health. There are miracle cures being touted on social media that contain chlorine dioxide, which is a toxin. There are efforts to suppress voter turnout in the 2020 election. There are rumors being spread about social justice protests. So if we want our young people to be equipped to make sense of this overwhelming amount of deeply problematic content and ensure the ongoing health of our democracy, we need to help students to be better consumers of this information. There's a lot of research showing that students sometimes struggle to evaluate the content that they encounter online. However, there's also a popular perception that young people are sometimes well equipped to evaluate online sources because they have grown up with digital devices in their hands. For instance, 2 weeks ago, Politico put out an article titled "When Gen Z is the Source of the Misinformation It Consumes," and it's include this quote: "To be sure, Gen Z does not need lessons on how to use the internet. They aren't falling for the same fake news stories that may have duped their parents in 2016. Unfortunately, our research has shown that that students actually do struggle to make sense of some of the same things that their parents struggled with in 2016. We last year completed a study of 3,446 high school students from across the country. It was a sample that reflects the population of high school students in the United States, and we asked those students to complete a series of short tasks where they evaluated real sources. One of the items that we gave students was a Facebook video from the 2016 election cycle. It was posted by somebody called Eye on Flicks with the caption, "Have you ever noticed that the only people caught committing voter fraud are Democrats?" And we played them a brief clip of the video. And I want to just show that to you so you can get a taste of what the video looked like, and then show you a little bit of what we found in terms of how students evaluated it. So the video includes a series of scenes of purported voter fraud. This one is labeled as being from Illinois, where there's a woman keeping her head down as it looks like somebody else is stuffing ballots into a ballot box. And then it shifts scenes to the worst case of all, supposedly in Arizona, where another it appears to be a poll worker is stuffing ballots into a ballot box as her colleague runs up to, it seems like, help her put more ballots into the ballot box. So we asked students a very straightforward question about this video. Does this post provide strong evidence of voter fraud during the 2016 Democratic primary elections? Explain your reasoning. And we found out of the more than 3,000 students who completed this task, 52% of the students believed the video was indeed strong evidence of voter fraud in the United States. Unfortunately, if somebody does a very brief search online, you will discover that the video is from Russia, that this has been widely debunked on a variety of fact-checking websites, and the videos have nothing to do with the Democratic primaries in the United States. However, 52% of students did not come to that conclusion. Instead, we saw responses like this one. The student who said, yes, it shows video evidence of fraud in several different states at multiple different times. So more than half of the students accepted this video at face value. Then, but perhaps just as troubling is that the majority of the remaining students also rejected the source for bad reasons. So they didn't come up with strong critiques of the video. Instead, they came up with responses like this one. The video only shows a few specific instances and is not enough to blame the whole Democratic Party of voter fraud. So what we saw was students who were instead saying that I'd like to see more evidence. This isn't enough evidence, but they weren't raising questions like, where'd this video come from? Is it showing what it says it is or what it claims to be showing? So some real issues being raised there about students' abilities to evaluate those sources in a credible fashion. We also asked students to distinguish between news and advertisements on news stories and advertisements on the homepage of Slate. And more than 2/3 of students could not distinguish between ads and news stories. So when they saw a post that very clearly said sponsored content, we saw them come up with responses like this one, where they said, the purpose is not to try to lure people to use a website or product. It's just an article on reasons women don't go into technology. a fundamental misunderstanding of now a very widely used approach to advertising, of native advertising or sponsored content, and that these high school students, 2/3 of them, were unaware of that distinction. These are reasons to be concerned, given how recently this study was completed, and that there is this sharp contrast between the reality of what students do when presented with sources online and this popular perception that because students grew up with devices, that they are well equipped to make sense of the information that they find on those devices. It suggests that we need to figure out a way to help students do better. And to do that, we set out to get a better sense of what does expertise look like in evaluating online sources? How do we do this well, and who does it? Who does it well? And so we completed a research project where we asked 3 different groups of people to evaluate a series of online sources. The 3 groups were freshmen at Stanford University, so young people who had won the admissions lottery and got into Stanford and were in the heart of Silicon Valley, and many of them will go on to open their own internet companies likely. And then also professors, history professors, folks who evaluate sources online as they're living. And then finally, fact checkers, folks from some of the most prominent news organizations in the United States. And we asked all 3 of them, all 3 groups, to look at some sources and to think about how they would evaluate them. And we recorded them as they evaluated those sources. What I'd like to do is show you a brief excerpt of a couple of those interviews as a Stanford student and a fact checker evaluate an article from minimumwage.com. If you're interested in seeing the article itself, you can check out that URL at the bottom, tinyurl.com, Denmark dollar. But I'd like us to watch these 2 short excerpts from the videos to get a sense of how these different groups approached evaluating sources online. So we're going to start with a student from Stanford and see how this young woman began to evaluate the source. So let's just see the beginning of her evaluation.
Denmark's $1.41 menu. Proponents of raising the minimum wage often point to Scandinavian countries like Denmark as models for American labor policy, but the devil's in the details. Take this week's New York Times profile of the comparatively high Danish minimum wages. I'll put that on the side for later. I'll scroll through it. For example, the authors ask, if the Danes can do it, why can't the United States? We just talked about this in my sociology class. It seems to work really well for Denmark, but one of the problems we came across was that they are a homogenous small country. So it makes it easy for this kind of stuff to happen. Whereas in a melting pot like the United States, there are more nuances to be considered. In the midst of a mostly fawning piece on Danish labor policy, the authors unwittingly answer their one-known question. It would lead to higher prices and fewer job opportunities.
This young woman then went on to go to the linked New York Times article that was included in this post, and she read that article before returning back to the minimumwage.com article, and this was her conclusion about the trustworthiness of this post on minimumwage.com.
I think this one's a little simplistic. I think the New York Times article is a little more nuanced. I don't think you can write what is this, 500 words on something like comparing Denmark and the United States. It's a little simplistic. The New York Times article is a little more nuanced, so I like it better.
So I want to emphasize that all the things that this student did well. She's reading carefully. She is connecting back to prior knowledge. She's doing the things that we'd like students to do when they are engaging in careful reading of an unfamiliar source. But she doesn't find out very much about this source. And the differences become quite stark when we compare her approach to how a professional fact checker engages with the same source. The fact checker landed on the minimumwage.com article, then quickly went to the about page for minimumwage.com, where he saw that it was a project of the Employment Policies Institute, which refers to itself as a nonpartisan, non-profit organization engaged in research around minimum wage policy. And so then he begins his evaluation from there. And we'll just watch about 30 seconds of what he does.
Employment Policies Institute. Again, Wikipedia has something to say about it. Oh, also SourceWatch. That was interesting. Let's see what else is here. Uh-oh. I don't know who that is, but Berman Exposed. Corporate America's New Scam. Here we go. New York Times has an article. And Charity Navigator. All right. Rick Berman and the Libertarian Shell Game. Okay, there's a bunch of stuff.
So in just over 30 seconds, the fact checker has opened up 7 new tabs to find out information about who's actually behind minimumwage.com and the Employment Policies Institute. And he's able to figure out that the organization, Employment Policies Institute, is run by a Washington, D.C. public relation firm, Berman & Co., which is owned by this gentleman, Rick Berman, who works for the food and beverage industry, who has a vested interest in minimum wage policy. As a result, the fact checker has a much better sense of what's going on here, that this is an effort to influence a policy debate about minimum wage through creating the appearance of a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that is in fact very deeply connected to organizations that are intimately involved in this policy debate. The Stanford student didn't discover any of that. And as a matter of fact, most of the Stanford students struggled to identify who is actually behind the website, as did many of the historians. So here on the top is the average amount of time that it took each group to first discover that the Employment Policies Institute was behind minimumwage.com. So on average, the fact checkers figured that out in about 50 seconds. It took the historians, who are in orange, almost 4 minutes. It took the students more than 5 minutes to come to that conclusion. Then in terms of making the connection back to Berman and Company, all of the fact checkers figured that out on average in just over 3 minutes. In comparison, the only 60% of the historians came to that conclusion, and only 40% of the students did. And it took them much longer to do it. Really striking differences in their evaluation of these sources. And it reveals what seems like a bit of a paradox, which is that in order to understand an unfamiliar website on the internet, the best way to do that is to leave it, to go elsewhere and look outside of the original source. And from our examination of all of these interviews with both the historians and the students and the fact checkers, there were some very clear differences in how the fact checkers approached the sources on the web, and how these very smart people, and I really want to emphasize the fact that the Stanford students and the historians are very bright people, and they are all in the same boat as us, that they were not taught how to make sense of the information they encounter online, and that we all are faced with trying to adapt to a rapidly changing digital environment. But they did do several things in common. One was that they generally stayed on a single page, and they read vertically. They treated a website like print text. They read up and down. They read carefully. They looked at word choice, and they didn't move much beyond that original source. When they did do some searching, they often engaged in a bit of random clicking on search results. They often clicked on the very top search result rather than looking beyond it. And in evaluating the website itself, they often look for familiar markers, things like the layout, the aesthetics. Is it a well-designed site? What is the top-level URL? It's a .org. Does that make it more trustworthy? Is there contact information? All of these are aspects of a website that the group that created the website can control, and as a result, don't provide much useful information for making an evaluation of the overall credibility of the source. In contrast, the fact checkers almost immediately left the unfamiliar page. Before they read anything on the page, they wanted to know more about where that website was coming from, who's behind it. And to do that, they read laterally. They opened up more tabs in the horizontal axis of their browser and searched for more information about the original site to figure out who's behind it and whether or not they should trust it. And then when they did those searches, they engaged in click restraint. Rather than clicking on the very top search result, they took 15 or 20 seconds and perused the sites to see what they could discover from those little snippets below each search result, and to determine whether or not those would be good starting places for further research. But most importantly, they turned to the web rather than trusting their own instincts or figuring out based on these the appearance of the site. They looked to the broader web to see what information they could find through that incredible interconnected set of resources that's available to us at the click of a browser. From our research with the fact checkers, we identified a series of strategies that they used, and we've sought to create materials to help students learn how to do this as well. We call our approach civic online reasoning, and we emphasize the civic dimension because civic engagement in our current digital age requires individuals to have the ability to effectively search for and evaluate social, political, and public health information online. And we saw that the fact checkers were guided by three big questions as they search for information online. They wanted to know who's behind this information, and they wanted to know what's the evidence for a claim that's being made on the internet. And what do other sources say that they turn to the web to find more information about a given source. And we set out to try to help students learn some of these very specific skills. Chief among them is this move that I mentioned before of lateral reading, of opening up new browser tabs and searching for other information about that site and looking for trusted sources of information. That approach of reading laterally was really what distinguished these fact checkers from the students and the academics. We've created materials that we will go through where they're available in just a moment, but we've created lesson plans for students to complete that focus on teaching these skills. So for instance, we have a lesson that introduces the skill of lateral reading, where students begin by evaluating that very same article from minimumwage.com. And they then share out their evaluations of how they thought about the source before a teacher models how they would approach minimumwage.com and how they would read laterally to find out more about who's behind it and to identify the connection between minimumwage.com and the Berman public relations firm. And then students practice lateral reading with another website using a different site. This is the Odyssey Online, which is a clickbait site that allows primarily college students to share unedited articles that about any topic. And so students need to learn something about this website to decide whether or not it is trustworthy as well before debriefing altogether. We've created these materials and we wanted to make sure that they actually work to see if students did become more skilled evaluators of online information as a result of completing these kinds of curriculum materials. And so last year we completed a match control study in a large Midwestern school district where we gave some students the Civic Online Reasoning curriculum, and some students completed their regular 11th or 12th grade government class. And we gave a pretest and a post-test to those students before and after they used the Civic Online Reasoning curriculum. And we saw that the students in the Civic Online Reasoning curriculum did indeed improve, that they scored much higher at post-test than their peers in the control classroom. So we can teach students these skills. Even if the challenge is significant, there's clear evidence that students can get better at learning these skills. And we've seen similar results in middle school and also in college classrooms. An illustration of what this looked like is from an interview we completed. We did with a smaller set of students. We did interviews before and after they completed Civic Online reasoning lessons. And so we asked them to look at a series of sources that were that were like the ones that are included in the curriculum, including that original video that we looked at the beginning of the session from about supposed voter fraud in 2016. And so this is how one 12th grade student answered, but at the beginning of the study. She looked at the video and she said, I don't think it's very strong evidence because they were showing it happening, but they weren't showing the total number of people that did it. That would have shown how big a problem it was. So she accepted it at face value. She said, yeah, it looks like it might be voter fraud, but I'd like to see more videos of voter fraud before I trusted it as a source. But she didn't ask any questions about where it came from. In contrast, at the end of the intervention, her response was quite different. She said, I'm wondering who's behind the publishing of this. Who is responsible for getting this on film? What were their intentions? Is there more information about this somewhere else? I don't trust this video. I definitely just Google Pennsylvania Democratic primary voter fraud. She does that, and an article from Snopes appeared as the first search result. And she opens that article up and says, a video, and she reads, a video passed off as voter fraud committed by Democrats during the 2016 primary was filmed in Russia. And then she said, so I already know it is not true. It is completely false. So really nice example of the change for this one student from going from accepting unfamiliar, problematic content at face value to having a disposition towards wondering, where's this information coming from, and having the skill of lateral reading at her disposal to go out and find better information to help her understand whether or not she should trust that source. All of the resources that we developed and used during that study are available on our website, cor.stanford.edu. There are about 30 lessons in addition to dozens of short assessments like that one about voter fraud. The only thing you need to do in order to access these resources is to create an account on the website. The account is totally free. You just need to have a functioning email address to access it. There are a whole series of lessons that are organized by those three main questions of who's behind the information, what's the evidence, and what do other sources say. There are also collections of curriculum that include lessons and assessments focused on particular skills. So if you want to teach lateral reading, there's a set of materials focused on that particularly. There's also introductory materials that help students to begin to be introduced to these ideas. The assessments are also featured there. The lessons are delivered as Google Docs, and the assessments are delivered as Google Forms, so that will facilitate the delivery of them, particularly in remote instruction, as we're all faced with in the course of the current pandemic. We also have a whole set of videos available on the website. There are 10 videos that we made in collaboration with John Green and the team at Crash Course that are focused on the exact same skills of Civic Online Reasoning that are featured in the curriculum. Those videos are each about 10 minutes long and certainly are very relevant for use with students. There are also a set of short animated videos that are targeted towards teachers, that they talk about how to think about teaching these particular skills in the context of a classroom. And then finally, there are a couple of videos that show what it looks like to implement Civic Online Reasoning lessons in classrooms. So you can watch teachers use them and also hear teachers and students reflect on their experiences with teaching these kinds of materials in their classrooms. If you would like to learn more about how to go about using these resources, we are currently running a free massive open online class, MOOC, in partnership with folks at MIT. It's available on edX. So if you search for Sorting Truth from Fiction, Civic Online Reasoning, it is available through November 15th. And the cost for getting a certified certificate at the end of it has been waived, so you can get that as well. That features a whole series of activities focused on using these materials in your classrooms, simulations about teaching, additional videos, and discussion boards where you have opportunities to talk through these issues of pedagogy with other teachers all across the country and in fact all around the world. So that is a very brief introduction to the research behind the Civic Online Reasoning curriculum and also the materials that are available on our website. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us if there are any questions that come up. We spend a lot of time sending materials off into the wilds of the web, and we don't always know what happens to them. So we love to hear from folks who are trying to use these materials. So please do let us know if you have any questions. If you want to find out when new resources go live, following our Twitter feed is probably the best way to proceed. We post whenever we make new materials available there. But thanks so much for joining us today. And I look forward now to our question and answer session that Kelly and Michelle are going to moderate.
Great. Thanks so much, Joel. I do need you to not, I can't get back on until you stop sharing, which is great. Okay, great. Thank you so much. That was awesome. I haven't, I know a lot obviously about your work and I know a lot about this particular project, but it was really interesting to hear you talk about it. Like, I feel like I got so much out of that. So thank you. I wanted to start just in terms of the timing of this. I've always wanted to ask, like, it's pretty extraordinary how this it came out in November of 2016. So it was right after the election. And I've always been really amazed. Obviously, you didn't plan what was going to happen and you didn't plan this incredible convergence of cultural conversation and this work. Was that something you couldn't have anticipated? But what was your response to that? And did that shift at all the way you were thinking?
So we had, a little bit more additional context is that in 2016, we released our initial study, which suggested how much students all across this country had struggled. And those statistics at the beginning of the talk were a follow-up study in 2019. So little has shifted, unfortunately, in terms of student struggle. So we were really fortunate to have been encouraged by the McCormick Foundation, which is based in Chicago, to begin to develop some short tasks that could measure how students evaluate online sources. And so they reached out to us late in 2014, and they had done a lot of work around both civics and around news literacy and media literacy, and they were interested to see if we might be able to develop some short assessments of students' abilities to make sense of online information, because we, as our name suggests, had previously focused primarily on history education and had developed a whole suite of short assessments focused on historical thinking. And so they asked, could we do some work that focused on really thinking about students' approach to evaluating digital content with this lens of civics at play, that it's not sort of anything at all, right? We're not looking at sort of how do you determine whether or not that video of a cat is trustworthy or not, but it's about preparation for civic engagement. And so looking at issues that are most impacted by information online. And so, so we certainly were very fortunate to have gotten a head start. And then, it was certainly a perfect storm that we released the study in November of 2016, which was just as we were finishing it up. And we certainly could never have expected that it would be timed with a presidential election that coincided with the skyrocketing of searching for the term fake news, right? If you look at Google statistics about how often the term fake news had been searched for, it's a flat line, and then there's November 2016, and then it goes straight up in the air. And so that was coincidental, but we certainly felt fortunate to have begun to do research in that regard. But it also made clear the need to quickly pivot to figuring out how to help students do better. It's one thing to identify the problem, but it's quite another to figure out how to provide support for students. And so that's the work that we've really been engaged in ever since.
Yeah, I mean, I do have to say the research that did come out originally has really been just an incredible resource for the whole community. So I appreciate it. To be able to look at that, to show the value of this type of work has been incredibly impactful. Kelly, I'm going to hand it over to you to ask a question or two.
Yeah, awesome. Great stuff, Joel. And thank you for letting me still have my cat videos. It's food for the soul. But many of our members started teaching before mobile devices, social media platforms even existed. And now they're finding themselves maybe teaching fully remotely. I mean, the trend line that we've seen of change, more media, more platforms, more devices, I mean, that it just doesn't seem like it's going to slow down anytime soon. So what is it about your methods that kind of future-proof the media literacy skills?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and I think the issue of further time online is a crucial one, right? That we students are online even more, right? And if you had told me in 2016 that the situation 4 years later would be more dire in terms of the amount of problematic content, I would have had a hard time believing you. But it's certainly true, and the need is more acute now than ever. And so I think there are a couple of things. One is, the kinds of problematic content is always going to shift, right? And so there is not going to be a silver bullet and one perfect way to inoculate against dangerous content online. But we can orient students towards being prepared to figure out whether or not to trust information, and to have them ask the question of where does this come from is a very different approach than what we see from thousands and thousands of student responses, right? That overwhelmingly students accept information at face value, or they employ outdated strategies to try to evaluate things like, is it a .org website, or is it well designed? Things that are totally useless in an age of inexpensive web templates, and given that .org has no connection to the trustworthiness of a site, but it's these sort of folk ways that students have learned over the years. And so I think the most important thing is getting students to ask that question of where's my information coming from? And we don't need to have students turn into professional fact checkers, but if they are at least oriented towards this idea of wondering where their information is originating, we're going to do better than we currently are.
Mm-hmm. So we are getting a bunch of questions in our Q&A. So I'd love to go to those, even though I'm sure Kelly and I could talk to you for the rest of the hour. So the video, Emily actually asked 2 questions, so I'm going to kind of combine them. The videos and sites you use for your lessons, very thoughtful, challenging for students to analyze, but still appropriate. Do you have further lists of misinformation or problematic online sources that you recommend using for the work? What about sources that would be appropriate for upper elementary and middle school? And do you have tips for selecting content to use with students?
Great question. Yeah, really good question, Emily. Thank you. And also thanks. I'm glad you've found the materials useful thus far. A couple of things. One, for many of the lessons that we currently have on the website, we have 2 versions. We call it level 1 and level 2, but the level 1 version we designed with middle school in mind. And so we picked out slightly less challenging content in terms of the background knowledge that might be required to make sense of it. So rather than having the minimumwage.com video, it was a video about Saturday school, and so it's a different kind of demand for students to understand it. But in terms of finding sources, I think there's several ways to think about that. One is to use fact-checking websites. That fact-checking websites are incredibly useful places to begin for finding problematic content that can be engaging for students, right? And that's part of what we're trying to do, is to find sources that are meaningful to students' lives, and also that highlight for them the dangers involved in misinformation, right? We want students to understand why they should care, right? And so for some students, maybe an issue about minimum wage is not relevant, but they might be very engaged if it's something that has to do with social justice protests, or about voter suppression, or even more local, about efforts to influence the soda tax debate that is happening in their city, that are being put on by Big Sugar, right? And so part of it is to locate those sources. So I think fact-checking websites are a really good source. Another one is to find news stories about a given topic, and to seek out and see what the good reporting has been about it, and try to figure out what are the issues at play. Both of those rely on the work of journalists. That the journalists have done some of the legwork for you. The other thing to do is to wade into sort of the dark corners of social media sites, and to try to find those sources, right? Unfortunately, at our current moment, it's not hard to come across problematic content. If you want to find some sources that have to do with misinformation related to the pandemic, or to voting, or to racial justice efforts, that there's a great deal out there. Another really good resource is related to COVID is the Poynter Institute. It has a clearinghouse of COVID fact checks from all around the world, and you can go there and search by location, and find those materials as well. Yeah, so a whole host of them. And I guess ultimately, coming back to the original point of upper elementary versus middle school, is to really take into account who your students are and what you think both they're capable of engaging with, and also what they might be interested in. And that if we can just get them to be asking this question of where does my information come from, that's a pretty big victory for that age level.
Another question is about kind of right-wing activist content. Is there a situation like, would you show videos from those types of sites in the classroom, and what are the pros and cons of that?
I think we need to be really careful about what are the sources that we show students, and also think through how we debrief our introduction of them, right? We don't want students walking away believing the misinformation that we present to them. And we also don't want to give oxygen to deeply dangerous or problematic content. And so there's a fine line to walk there. And I think it's really important to think through what are the sources you're going to give your students, and whether or not, you want them to be engaging with those sources, and what might be the consequences of it, and I think that ultimately pieces of that have to be decisions made on a personal level. But I think, I and our group has leaned away from providing sources that are sort of veer into the conspiracy realm, and come from hate groups or sources in along those lines, because we don't want to be exposing students to those. But I think, ultimately it's, individual educators need to make their decisions along those lines. That's where we have come down.
Yeah. Do you have, I guess, like, as far as how students, how teachers are responding to this curriculum, do you have any information of even how they're incorporating it into the school year? Like, how are they fitting this into everything else they have to do?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's one of the biggest issues that has come up as we've worked with teachers over the last year. So we launched the curriculum in December of 2019. So it's been online just about a year. And curricular integration is the biggest challenge. That as educators, the one thing you don't have is time, right? As you already have a jam-packed curriculum, and making new curriculum is really time consuming. And so we really believe that the best way to approach this is integrating it across the curriculum. And so finding opportunities in all subject areas to have students begin to learn some of these skills. We're currently working with a school in Illinois to integrate these approaches to online information across the 9th grade curriculum. And so in 9th grade biology, in their introductory unit about caffeine, students evaluated a article from foodinsight.org, which has close links to companies that make caffeinated beverages, right? And so, of evaluating whether or not that's a trustworthy source about caffeine, and at least taking into account the people who are producing that information, and then doing the same kind of lateral reading in their geography class, and looking as they learn about sanitation issues, of looking at trustworthy sources. And I think that's an important piece also, is that we don't only want to show students problematic content, we also want to show students really good sources, because we don't want students to become cynics. We want them to be skeptical, but not cynical, right? That people who peddle disinformation ultimately are trying to breed confusion, and that if you are confused about what to trust, one inclination is simply to reject everything. And that is just as damaging as believing misinformation. And so we want students to have a disposition to wonder where that information is coming from, but we don't want them to be cynical and believe that there's no truth out there. And so we want to show students good sources and give them opportunities to practice with strong sources as well. And so of showing them a good source of information, if they're learning about caffeine in their biology class and doing a research project, to say, why is that source a good one, right? It doesn't only have to be finding bad sources. It's just asking them when they do research online to be asking these questions and to be thinking about these issues, so that it's that there's opportunity to practice, because it's become very clear that the idea of lateral reading is very straightforward, but developing the content knowledge to do it well takes time, right? It's one thing to know to open a new tab. It's another thing to understand what to do with all the information you come across when you do that search, right? So we just need to give students a lot of practice and hear it across the curriculum. So it's not just like, oh, it's Mr. Breakstone in his history class talking about this again. Instead, it's, well, I heard that in biology class yesterday, and when we were doing statistics in math class, we heard about it, right? So it just becomes routine.
Sure. Yeah, I love, really great framing. I love those points, and that's, definitely fully support that. It's that we have to be doing this in all classrooms. Kelly, I had some more comments, but did you want to weigh in?
Yeah. Well, I also just wanted to ask, did you kind of envision that your curriculum would be able to maybe transcend age? Because, we're teaching maybe freshmen or sophomores that, need better media literacy skills, but so might their parents. So how do you approach, that conversation with the students? And I didn't know if that was like a part of your guys' approach at all, or what your thoughts were.
I mean, it's really, it's crucial, right? It's our research has shown that it's not just students who struggle, right? It's the professors had difficulty making sense of this. And, there's a great deal of evidence in the world that shows that lots of people are not equipped to make sense of online information. And again, that's not a knock, right? That's just the reality that none of us were prepared for the onslaught of information that we all encounter whenever we look at one of our devices. And so I think that it's the crucial question going forward for all of us involved in media literacy education is, how do you expand this work to go beyond the walls of schools, and what are the ways in which to provide opportunities for other people to learn these skills, and what are the ways to do that efficiently, right? That, it's one thing to try to weave this in across the curriculum, where students in their educational careers will have many opportunities to see it and engage with it. But it's another to how do you do that for people who only are going to spend a few minutes, right? But how can we give practical advice that is implementable quickly? Is, I think, something we all need to wrestle with and quickly.
Yeah. We are getting a lot of questions throughout all of events about like the non-educational spaces, like reaching the general public, especially senior citizens, adults, all the stuff that you were just saying. So we're getting a lot of those requests. And I guess one of the things I want to make clear to the people that are listening too is that, media literacy started in the higher ed academic space. And the fact that we're talking about K-12 right now is actually not something that's relatively new.
Yes.
And so I just want everyone to know that this is new also, and that I think we recognize that there is a lot of work to be done, and that media literacy skills are a continuum from earliest ages through, cradle to grave. But I wondered if you had, were there any thoughts from your group regarding older, like seniors, or, I know you said you had the MOOC. I imagine that's kind of open to anyone. Like, is there anything that you could speak, because we keep getting questions about it?
Yeah, for sure. So I think that there are some really great opportunities in online education. So the MOOC that we created was targeted more for educators and thinking about how do you do this in educational settings. But I think that going forward, there are real opportunities for doing online education. We just completed a study in a college nutrition class that was fully asynchronous. And we just had the students watch some of those crash course videos that we developed and complete the activities that we, some of the ones that were from the website, except that we adapted them to have nutrition themed sources rather than the content that was previously in there. And we gave them a pre-test and post-test, and we saw the same thing, that we saw real growth as a result. And so I think it speaks to the way in which we can teach these things without necessarily having to have people in a physical classroom, and that there are ways in which we can make those same kinds of educational opportunities available online. I think the key part of that is to figure out, how do you do it in bite-sized pieces? And so if thinking about, can you make an engaging, interactive website where people go onto the website and have opportunities to engage with some interesting sources and get good feedback about how to think about evaluating those sources, so that you could have lots of people doing that and be interested and engaged in doing it and learning something at the same time. But I think that ultimately we need to be creative and figure out some ways to do it in the space where people are encountering the information, which is online, and that our initial experience has been that we can move the needle, as it were, in terms of changing people's ability to evaluate sources. So we need to just keep on trying and see what works.
You mentioned the crash course videos, and I have to say I'm like a huge fan of them. I think they came out superbly, and I think they're really, really great, rich content for classrooms. I'm curious, I guess this is more of a media literacy look at curriculum writing in terms of kind of translating, because really what those are is a video translation of the concepts that are in the curriculum.
Yep.
So I'm wondering if you could just talk a little bit about what that process was like, and break it down in the sense of, like, you couldn't fit everything. Like, how do you make the choices? And how does just that process, I think, is interesting.
Yeah, well, thanks so much. I'm glad you've liked the videos. It was really fun. So, we had certainly never done anything like this before, and the crash course team is expert at it, right? That John Green and his brother Hank are sort of some of the earliest YouTube stars, right? And they have an incredible following and have made videos that have been seen tens of millions of times. And so we got to learn a lot in terms of how they approach it. And so what they do is they asked us to create a syllabus of what is the content that you would want to cover. And we started with this idea that we would have 10 episodes in the series. And so then our team sat down to figure out, okay, so we have a curriculum that we're working on now, and we know that we want to address these topics. So what would that look like across 10 episodes? And so we figured out and roughed out the basic idea of what those 10 episodes would be. And then we wrote the content for them. So, we said, okay, we're going to have a video about lateral reading, and then there's going to be one about evaluating evidence. And another one's going to be about social media. And we wrote all of the kinds of things that we think should be addressed in it, and also pulled examples of, this is a website that would be useful. Here's a particular kind of activity that you could demonstrate as part of it. And then they had a whole team that essentially crash coursified it, that they made it funny and engaging. And then on top of that, and so they then wrote a sort of a version of it as a script. And then we went back in and edited it based on sort of their approach to make it funny and fun. And then we did some editing and back and forth. And then John Green took it and made it sort of his very own, and had his own takes on the things and bits. And that's the sort of ultimate final product. And then we just did a little bit of editing after he had made his versions of the videos. But yeah, really, really fun to watch the process of creating a video that gets, reach that we would never, ever be able to have, right? Those videos have now, I think, been viewed nearly 2 million times, right?
Yeah, and I think that's a great example of a resource that's available to anyone at any time.
Yep, exactly, right. And so how do you think about getting those out there, right? Like, what are the avenues for doing it, right? And how do you reach a larger audience? Like our videos sit on our YouTube channel, and they don't get 2 million views, right?
Yeah.
And so how do you think it through that issue of scale?
Yeah. Kelly, I'll go for one more question from you, and then I have one more, and then we'll wrap this up.
Awesome. This kind of came out at a time where education is almost reinventing itself on the fly, and our educators, our teachers, are reinventing the wheel as they're searching for resources, they're searching for curriculum to use. And I just wanted to kind of talk about what kind of customization that's available to them. That's one of our challenges. Serving high school teachers is no two teacher is in the same situation anymore. I mean, they're all doing something different, and then that changes the next week, and it could possibly change yet again. And so just thinking through how they might deploy this and what kind of tools you've provided for that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a crucial issue to take up, in particular in this current moment when it seems like virtually no two schools are alike in terms of how they're approaching teaching in the midst of a pandemic. So we have made the materials hopefully as adaptable as possible because we deliver them as Google Docs. And so you download the Google Doc and suddenly it's yours. And so you can adapt it in any way that you see fit. And our hope is that the teachers can do exactly that. And so, the lesson is built around a given source. There's no reason you can't swap it out for one that is even more topical, right? And so rather than doing the minimum wage.com article that, you can go and find an article from Flatten the Fear, which is also an organization that is a front group and is funded by folks who are opposed to efforts to engage in shutdowns to limit the spread of the coronavirus. And so our hope is that the teachers can modify the materials to best meet the needs of their particular students. And so by making them available as Google Docs and as Google Forms, it makes it a little easier to think through how to go about modifying for your particular context.
So my final question is just kind of about the longevity of the program, like the project. And we know that there's, a lot of curriculum out there, and there is a point where it kind of gets like outdated, and then it's such a shame because it's such good stuff, and how do you keep it up? And so I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about, like, do you guys think about 5 years from now? Are you thinking about this as a real long-term project, and what can we expect?
Yeah, absolutely. So we definitely are planning to continue our work in this area and figure out ways to make these materials as accessible and as useful as possible. And we know a big part of that will be continuing to update the resources and to continue to roll out new ones, and particularly to think about making materials that are most useful for teachers in the content area. So our biggest focus going forward is developing lessons that are subject specific. So if having history lessons that are focused on teaching the skills of online reasoning, and math lessons and science lessons, so that less of the work falls onto the back of already overworked teachers. And so rather than having to go find the subject specific resources to be able to seek those out and make minor modifications rather than wholesale alterations to it. So that's our most immediate work. And then thinking through issues of professional development for teachers, right? That this is new for most teachers, that this is not what they've been teaching previously, and we need to support teachers to do that well. And so we're definitely going to try to work on that. The MOOC was an initial step in that way, and then to work on the broader public. What does it look like beyond making videos with like the crash course ones? What are other ways that we could reach out to beyond the K-16 universe that has been primarily where we have worked thus far. So those are some of the next steps. We'll see what comes, but we're definitely in it for the long haul.
That's great. That's awesome. Will you do me a favor and just share again the website and your handle and all those things so that people can come and find you? Great. That's wonderful. And Kelly, any last final word?
Just thank you for the work that you're doing. I know that it's making a difference. So I appreciate all that you're putting out there for teachers who need it more than ever at the moment.
Well, thanks so much to both of you. It's been really fun to be in conversation with you, and thanks to everyone who joined us.
Yeah, thank you so much, Joel. And thank you, Kelly and JEA, for your partnership. Keep up the good fight. It's awesome stuff. So glad I got to learn more about it. For all of you, US Media Literacy Week continues through Friday. We have a ton of events going on. Check us out at medialiteracyweek.us. We also launched a new PSA campaign, stopmediamonsters.com. Go check that out. Thank you, Joel. Thank you, Kelly. Have a great rest of your day.